Hello everyone, and welcome on back to the channel. It is absolutely lovely to see you here in this moment of celebration as we congratulate the developers for all their hard work in constructing and also showcasing 9 elite specializations. Yes, the event of the Elite Specialization live streams is now over, with them revealing the Conduit, the Amalgam, and the Evoker. And today, we're going to talk about each of the Elite Specializations in generality, and I'll be giving my review and thoughts. Let's begin with the Conduit, the Revenant Elite Specialization. So, much like the blog post, the information that was provided is about what we can expect. I would say that out of the Elite Specializations shown in this batch, in this trio, the Conduit was a little bit more on the simplistic side, but that's not to say it's bad at all or write it off. I actually think that the Conduit, in its simplicity, is going to be rather entertaining. You gain access to the new legend via Raza, where you kind of act as more of that classic dervish type playstyle, and this whole entire Elite Specialization has a rather large emphasis on the legend that you are taking, and I guess the legends that you're taking, considering Raza is an optional legend and not mandatory. With this being said, let's take a look at the new profession mechanic first. This is something that they had teased with the new affinity resource, and as it is right now based off of the UI, things can change, but I don't think the UI representation was the best it could be. I'd much rather have 3 orbs above your health pool, so you can have more of that centralized information of your resource gauge. But essentially, what this profession mechanic does is somewhat reward you for spending a bit more time in a legend, and by utilizing more of those legend abilities. Essentially, you will have a short duration buff that you can proc whenever it's off cooldown, but by using your legend's abilities, you gain affinity, which is a resource that will increase the duration of the buffs. So, spending a bit more time using abilities, you can get a little bit more out of your F2 effect. For Raza, you gain the Cosmic Wisdom of the Dervish. For Malix, the Cosmic Wisdom of the Mesmer. Ventari for the Monk. Assassin for Shiro. And the Warrior for Jalis. Going down this line, the Raza stance, the Dervish, is a bit more of a catch-all celestial stat boost where you have just a whole bunch of stat increases, but I think to point out and to mark it as being more different, when you strike enemies, you have this spectral dervish scythe whirl around you to additionally strike enemies, which is nice to see. For the Mesmer, you're really focusing in on your conditioned damage by applying random stacks of Bleeding, Torment, or Confusion. For the Monk, which is Ventari, it emphasizes healing power and self-healing. The Assassin increases your power and applies some debilitating conditions, and the Warrior, Jalis, will increase your fortitude and your survivability with increased toughness and access to defensive boons. And it's actually in this section talking about the F2 that I have my one and only critique / idea. The one Cosmic Wisdom effect that I found to be rather lacking, and maybe not completely congruent with what its playstyle is actually the Cosmic Wisdom for Monk, which is tied to Ventari. This is just self-healing, and I think with the way Ventari works and the kind of role of the Monk, it would also be more understandable for this to share that healing to allies around you. And this could be some type of combat healer in a way. Whenever you attack, you're able to heal allies, which is something that isn't always shown off in Guild Wars 2, but Revenant has bits and pieces of it. So that's my one bit of critique for it. But then specifically, let's talk about the new legend of Raza. Now, Raza is designed as a very versatile legend to pair well with any of the other core Revenant legends. Each of these skills have their individual effect, but will play an additional effect depending on the secondary legend that you have. For example, The healing ability will heal you and gain a defensive buff for yourself, but if you are paired with the legendary Centaur stance, that healing and damage reduction buff is also shared to your allies around you while this spell is pulsing. And this same pattern can be said for all of his other abilities. Beguiling Haze is associated with Shiro the Assassin. Gladiator's Defense is tied to the Warrior Jalis. And Hex Eater Vortex is, to no one's surprise, tied to Malix. Elite ability is the one that is the most interesting in my opinion, as it has its own baseline effect, but gains an additional element to it, depending on the legend that is associated with it. And then finally, as for the traits, they're much more simplistic. They augment the affinity resource, increasing your access to generating it, changing the way that you might look at it, and transforming it as a energy builder rather than its own unique resource that affects your F2. And with all of this, it seems very approachable. The tooltips themselves are not super huge. The ones that are maybe a bit longer are just kind of describing the passive bonuses you'll get by choosing it, which will further empower your F2 abilities. And I like them. I think all in all, Conduit is simplistic, but tastefully done. Now let's move on to another elite specialization that is a little bit more complex compared to the Conduit, which is the Amalgam. The Amalgam is, I want to say, shockingly a hit, but in all honesty, with the history of engineer elite specializations, they tend to do extremely well. And this one, I think, is maybe head and shoulders above even previous engineer elite specializations. I'm dying to play this. So as it goes, the Amalgam will have a standard F1 and F5 ability. These are your healing tool belt and your F5 elite tool belt skill, which is Evolve. The tool belt skills you can change are quote-unquote your standard utility selection for your F2, F3, and F4. Now with these 3 slots, you can choose up to 7 different abilities. You can choose 3 defensive protocols and 4 offensive ones. These protocols are awesome. They were shown off in the trailer. They are the ferrofluid weapons and effects that you utilize. Some of the defensive ones that I really enjoyed was the protocol Protect, which is a 1.5 second block. I've also really enjoyed Cleanse, which I just really like the icon as well. It converts damaging conditions into barrier and non-damaging conditions into protection. But also the offensive protocols are really cool and quite strong. One of them is called Obliterate, which has a skill fact that it just completely breaks barrier, which is going to be really strong in PvP, but I imagine in certain PvE encounters, it's also going to be very strong. Certain boss encounters that utilize a lot of barrier. But all of these abilities come with their standard effect. They're further enhanced by your F5 Evolve skill. Now this Evolve feature does have its own unique buff by granting you increased attributes by 10% for a duration, and gives you bonuses based off of the 3 morph skills that you have chosen. For example, the Protect one, the block that I was talking about, when you use Evolve, because you have the Protect slotted, you'll additionally grant yourself barrier and resistance. And if you have the Cleanse one slotted as well, when you press Evolve, you gain healing over time via a unique effect, and you grant yourself Alacrity. So there are additional layers to all of these choices that you have to consider when you are choosing your morph loadout, because this Evolve is extremely important and can bring with it some extremely impactful gameplay features. And as it is, I have no critiques or ideas or points of feedback for any of the morph skills or the Evolve function. I think I'm also not much of an NG player, so I'm just taking all of this at a very superficial level. But on top of this, they gain access to stance skills, which further plays around with that ferrofluid ooze theme that is seen on all aspects of this elite specialization. And I really like these abilities. I think that the heal is pretty cool. It's a healing over time, but if you have barrier on yourself, the healing is much stronger. You have a liquid state, which allows you to melt into the ground. And I thought this was just going to be like an elementalist weaver sword effect where you plunge into the ground and you burst back out. But no, you can actually move around while you're like a liquid ooze, and when you run, or I guess slide under enemies, you deal damage and apply conditions to them. So there's this slight mobility aspect to it that is more interesting and more unique to the Amalgam. And then on top of all of this, you have your traits. And once again, these traits are fairly simplistic and easy to understand, but have a strong theme. One I want to talk about is Contagious Mutation. This allows your strain enhancement effects, the ones on your morph abilities, to be shared to nearby allies. And on this class, you have access to both alacrity and quickness for yourself. Now, if you take this trait, that means that self-application of those boons is going to be shared out, granted at a slightly reduced effectiveness. But with concentration, with certain builds, I'm wondering how much uptime one Amalgam is able to get out of both of those boons, not only for themselves, but for the group. I'm really excited to play the Amalgam. I don't have many other thoughts or critiques, but I think it's a standout. And then they walked us over to, in my opinion, my favorite elite specialization out of this entire expansion. This is the Evoker. Now, on paper and on the presentation, this looks like right up my alley. Essentially, you will specialize into a particular element, and through that specialization, you will summon a familiar. You can choose this freely out of combat. You have the fox, the otter, the hare, and the toad. Schlappy oopy goopy toad. These familiars are not necessarily pets. They don't have their own independent AI. They will follow you and teleport to you if you get out of range, so they're always going to be by your side. But they're not dealing damage passively. I think that could have been a nice trait, but it is what it is. Instead, you have to build up your pet's ability that you will use yourself by activating 6 abilities. Now, this is halved if you're using certain attunement abilities that are associated with that familiar. So fire attunement spells will charge up your Firefox's ability much faster than, say, water, air, or earth attunement, which makes sense. It's emphasizing that particular attunement. Now, fire is more so condition focused. Water is, of course, healing and regeneration focused. Your hare is power focused, which is nice to see. And then your earth toad, your tectonic toad, if we're playing off of alliteration, is more about that bruisery element, a little bit more self-sustain, and also controlling the battlefield, which is really cool to see. All of these familiars have basic abilities, but when you use your basic abilities a certain amount of times, it unlocks its empowered effect. And these are just much stronger, impactful spells that the familiar will utilize. The utility skill type that the Evoker actually gets is Meditations. I don't think they actually mentioned this, so it was kind of a surprise when they hovered over and I was like, Meditations, something that used to just really be on Guardian. It's kind of a nice touch. Now, these are pretty cool. They are fairly accessible spells, but all have a slight addition if you are using that particular utility skill that is associated with your familiar that you've chosen. As it is right now, they mentioned that the specialized familiar effect is rather boring. And I agree. It doesn't really punch as much as it should. It just essentially means that that particular utility skill is now a stun break. So if you're specializing in the water otter, the otter's compassion utility skill is your stun break. I don't think this is good. I think it's rather boring and too simplistic. This is where I actually have ample feedback in terms of ideation on what this effect could be. All of these utility skills could proc a more unique effect depending on your familiar. So Fox's Fury could do something along the lines of transforming this single target damaging ability into slightly more AoE application, where it will strike additional enemies around that target. The water one, I think kind of interestingly, could give you a self buff, which gives you more rewards for applying regeneration, as regeneration is a very strong boon through line in many of the healing traits and with a lot of what the otter is already doing. So regeneration, maybe I thought like it's applying alacrity and it's Grandmaster, so maybe you are able to charge up alacrity depending on how many applications of regeneration you can get out successfully. Something to kind of engage that gameplay element for a healer on a different level than what they're used to. Something for the hair would maybe just being like damage when you get to your location, when you're evading to that location. And then for the Toad's Fortitude, this could be the stun break, but have its unique effect be that it's an AoE stun break and stability access for allies around you if you are specializing in the Toad. I think that's all I really have to say about the actual utility skills. I think they are good. They're simplistic, but good. I think the specialized elements should add a bit more color to all of these and a little bit more vibrancy. So I'm going to be on the lookout as to what they have in mind. And then we get to the traits. The traits are very well structured. The Adept and the Master tier, the bottom and the top ones have to do with a particular familiar or like pulling from those effects without actually having to specialize. The two middle trait lines are kind of just general things that you can take. And there's a little bit of choice here, though I do imagine that depending on the role you're playing, you'll have a bit more of a pattern that you can logically follow. It's in the Grandmaster tier that it really starts to change the way you look at this class. Familiar's Focus is your first Grandmaster, and it just improves your passive benefits that you get. And then your second Grandmaster, this gives you access to Alacrity and Quickness. So if you're a healer, you're probably going to take the Otter. So the Otter abilities will now grant Alacrity to you and allies around you. And if you are more of a damage, power-focused player, you can take the Hare, which will give Quickness. I really like this theming, where healers will apply Alacrity and damage dealers will apply Quickness. In the game, as it is, most healers apply Alacrity when compared to Quickness, and I actually think that going down this line and maybe more strongly adhering to it could help facilitate a better LFG system as well. Not only does this have like gameplay clarity, but it could also better support future systems that they might be developing. And then finally, we have specialized elements. This trait is absolutely incredible. I love it so damn much. Specialized elements is something that I would have really loved to have seen on Firebrand, actually, where when they were talking about the rework, people had thrown around the idea of specializing into a tome, which I actually would have loved. This is the same thing actually done on Elementalist of all professions, the one profession that doesn't have a weapon swap, that is very reliant on multiple attunements, but it essentially means that your 4 attunement skills are transformed into your specialized attunement. I think they had mentioned that like you still have interplay depending on your F slot, but the only thing is those spells won't change. You will always have access to that weapon and that attunement's abilities. They will never go away. And in this situation, I have a suggestion. They even mentioned that they are not completely satisfied with this trait, and I think the one element that would be absolutely needed for this is weapon swap. Elementalist doesn't have weapon swap because they have access to 4 variations of weapon abilities with their attunement system, but if you take that away, you greatly hinder their utility and ability to approach a combat situation. I also think it'd just be fun, like as a healer, you'll probably take staff, but you don't have a whole lot of damage application on that. I would love to then pair it with like the spear, which has healing of course, but is maybe a little bit more damage focused. So having that flexibility would be really smart. But other than that, Evoker, top fave. Really impressed with this specialization, and honestly all of the specializations that have been shown. And be on the lookout for an Elite Specialization tier ranking video coming to you very soon. If you would like to help support the channel, I have links down below where you can pre-order Visions of Eternity, or try Guild Wars 2 for free. So if you or any friends are looking, you can utilize those. Thank you so much. Follow me over on Twitch. I stream Fridays and on the weekends. And like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to hear what you have to say about all of these specs. What were your favorites? How incredible is Evoker? Are you an Evoker hater? If so, what's up? What's wrong? And I will see you all in the next video. I'll see you all later. Bye-bye. Mwah.